Hey everybody, today I want to start a new video series that I'm going to do on this channel where I highlight each of the Beatles albums, but I tell you 10 facts that I think you may not know about these albums. Now, of course, there are Beatle fanatics out there, much like myself, who know almost everything there is to know about the Beatles. By the way, I don't know everything there is to know about the Beatles, but I do know quite a lot. I've read tons and tons of books. I basically just have studied the Beatles for the last, I'm 36, probably for the last 28 years of my life, I've studied the Beatles. So I'm going to do this series where I highlight each of the Beatles albums, each of their UK albums, by the way. And obviously, we're first going to start with their very first album, Please Please Me. And we'll just go down this list of 10 facts that I think you may not know about Please Please Me. So here we go. Let's start it off. I even have an official printed out list of the facts. I did some research. So, here we go. Let's start it off. The very first fact about Please Please Me, which, by the way, is, of course, the Beatles' very first album. This happens to be a mono pressing, and this one over here happens to be a stereo pressing. This was released on the Parlophone label, of course. And the very first fact I have is that originally, George Martin wanted to record the Beatles at the Cavern Club and do a live recording of their material at the Cavern Club, which is kind of crazy to think about because obviously Please Please Me was recorded at Abbey Road in the studio, but having their first album be a quote-unquote live album, which I'm sure they would have added overdubs to as well, is kind of an interesting idea to think about how that would have changed just the history of the Beatles. Because if that would have been a big hit, which it probably would have been because it would have had the same songs, which were all very great, then it probably would have, maybe they would have recorded their next album also at the Cavern Club or at another type of live atmosphere. So it's kind of interesting to think about. So that first fact is that George Martin originally thought about recording this album at the Cavern Club. Very weird. But obviously he didn't do it because the logistics were kind of crazy to go down to the Cavern Club and try to record that in that very small, damp club. So didn't happen. Fact number 2, Andy White, who of course famously replaced Ringo on drums for Love Me Do, actually also plays on another song on Please Please Me. He plays on P.S. I Love You. So Andy White plays on 2 songs on the Please Please Me album, Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You. Now, of course, not to get confused, because Ringo actually did play on the single version of Love Me Do, but not the single version of P.S. I Love You, because there's only one version of P.S. I Love You, and that is the version that's on the album and on the B-side of Love Me Do on the single. So, kind of interesting to think about that Andy White, you always think of him as playing on Love Me Do, but he also plays on P.S. I Love You. By the way, the first 2 facts that I'm giving you are probably the most well-known facts that I'll be throwing at you right now. Okay, number 3, and this one I really did a lot of studying for. There were a bunch of other songs that the Beatles thought about recording for Please 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 Me, and in fact one that they ended up actually recording during these sessions that they didn't release on this album. Those songs, a couple of them are, one is Keep Your Hands Off My Baby. This is a song that George Harrison mentioned that they had in their arsenal at the time. This is, of course, a cover song. And it's actually a really, really good song, in my opinion. And you can actually find a live version of the song the Beatles did on the BBC album, the very first BBC album, Volume 1. And it's an excellent, excellent song with John singing lead. So that would have been an interesting song to have included on Please Please Me, and it would have fit in perfectly with a bunch of the other songs on there as well. Another song that George Harrison mentioned that they may have run through during the Please Please Me sessions was a song called Your Feet's Too Big. Now, this is a song that can be found on the Beatles' the Star Club recordings, which are, of course, technically a bootleg, I guess, at this point, but they were officially released in the late 70s. And there's a very poor recording of Your Feet's Too Big on there, but it's done very, very good, in my opinion, by the Beatles. They have Paul singing lead on that. That's another song that would have been a great addition to Please Please Me, in my opinion. Another song is a song called Lend Me Your Comb, which was released eventually from a BBC version, was released on Beatles Anthology number 1. And you can also find that same recording on another of the Beatles' BBC albums, On Air, which is volume 2 of the BBC recordings. Another very, very interesting song that would have, of course, fit perfectly with the Please Please Me material. Now, there are 3 songs that I think were very, very close to being on the album, closer than the ones I just mentioned. And the first one is a song called Hold Me Tight, which of course was later released on the Beatles with the Beatles album, which is their album after Please Please Me. Hold Me Tight was actually recorded during the sessions for Please Please Me. At least it was started then. And it was really highly considered to be on the album. And obviously Paul McCartney thought the song was good enough to include during their very first album recording sessions. So Hold Me Tight was a definite contender to be on the Please 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 Me album. And of course, as I said earlier, it eventually did end up on the With the Beatles album. And of course, it's a very, very good song. Another song that the Beatles had already recorded and that was in the can that could have been included on Please Please Me was a cover of a song called Bésame Mucho. Now, this was a song they recorded during their very first recording session at EMI, Abbey Road. Of course, that very first session, it's been put into question as if that was an audition or if it was an actual recording session or what the heck it really, really was. Whatever it actually was, we probably will never know, but they definitely recorded some material that day. And one of those songs, Please Please Me, or not Please Please Me, Bésame Mucho, still exists, and it was eventually released on Beatles Anthology 1, and it's a very good recording of Bésame Mucho, and it would have fit, I think, with the other songs on Please Please Me. In fact, I would have liked to have heard Bésame Mucho instead of A Taste of Honey. That's just my own personal preference. I like their recording of A Taste of Honey on Please Please Me, but I think Bésame Mucho would have been a little bit of a better tune as far as just that kind of style song on Please Please Me. And another song that they had, that they actually recorded for their Decca audition, is a song that was written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney. More of a Paul song, I think, than a John song. A song called Love of the Loved. Now, this is a very, very corny type, late 50s, early 60s kind of like pop song is how I would describe it. But the Beatles on the Decca audition, which you can find on bootlegs, Love of the Loved, in my opinion, is one of the highlights, just because it's an original Lennon McCartney song. And it would have been nice to have, another Lennon McCartney song on the Please Please Me album. You get a bunch on here, obviously, that are all excellent. But having another one maybe in place of, like I've just previously mentioned, A Taste of Honey, or even like Boys or Chains, as much as I love those songs, by the way, they're great covers, it would have always been cool to have another Lennon McCartney song on an official Beatles album. So those are just some of the songs that have been mentioned by either the Beatles in interviews or actually in like Mark Lewison's book, recording sessions that were actually recorded during the Please Please Me sessions that could have been on the album. Okay, fact number 4. George Martin overdubbed piano parts onto the songs Misery and Baby It's You after the Beatles had already left. He added the overdubs, I think, like a couple days later, or even maybe a week after the Beatles recording session. So that's kind of interesting to think about. That I wonder if the Beatles had knowledge that he was going to add the piano part, or if George Martin just went ahead and did it on his own. Whatever the case was, I really like the piano that George Martin added to, especially Baby It's You, and Misery, of course, too. That very first chord of Misery. It just sounds great. And George Martin, by the way, obviously was an excellent piano player, great musician in his own right. Played piano on a lot of Beatles tracks, including the ones I just mentioned, and of course, famously, the solo on In My Life. So just a great piano player in his own right. The next fact is fact number 5. And this is one that I didn't really realize before, but it's pretty cool. And this is actually something you could do on your own. And I have actually already done this in my iTunes. All of the songs on Please Please Me have live performances on the BBC. So you could make Please Please Me live at the BBC album if you compile all the songs together. And all of them have been officially released, versions of them, except for Love Me Do. Except that Love Me Do does exist as a BBC recording. It just hasn't been released on BBC Volume 1 or BBC Volume 2 on air. But you can still find Love Me Do, on lots and lots of bootlegs. So if you could put together a Please Please Me live version of Please Please Me for yourself, and I actually have done that on my iTunes, and I gotta say, it's really, really fun to listen to because it's a little bit obviously more rough around the edges, but it's just a fun experience to listen to Please Please Me in a different kind of way. So I thought that was kind of cool. Number 6, so famously, Please Please Me has always been talked about as the Beatles recorded the album all in one day, in one long 10-hour session. And while that sounds amazing, and it obviously would be amazing, it's not quite true. Because of the 14 songs on Please Please Me, only 10 of them, and I say only 10 of them, 10 of them were recorded in one day. 4 of them were the singles that Beatles had recorded prior to these sessions. And those 4 were Please Please Me, Ask Me Why, Love Me Do, and P.S. I Love You. Those 4 songs were recorded before the actual album sessions for Please Please Me. But the other 10 songs were recorded in one day, which is amazing, quite unbelievable, especially when you consider the quality of all those 10 songs. They're amazing. Songs like Twist and Shout, There's a Place, I Saw Her Standing There, Do You Want to Know a Secret, Chains, Baby It's You, the list goes on and on. Those are just amazing recordings, and it's just unbelievable they recorded all those songs in one day. Next fact, and this one kind of goes along with that 10-hour session. All the Beatles had colds during that 10-hour session, and John had the worst of the colds, and you can really hear it in his voice. In fact, I think there's like some quote for John where he says that he was sucking on Zoobs, and Zoobs were like these British cough drops, and that's how he was able to keep his voice in any type of singing condition during that 10-hour long session. So that's kind of crazy to know. And if you listen to John and George, especially John and George, you can really hear it in their voices that they had colds on those 10 songs that were recorded in that one day. Number 8, there's a really cool mess up on the stereo version of Please Please Me, the song Please Please Me. It happens at 1 minute and 27 seconds. And what happens is John and Paul sing different words at the same time. So Paul is singing a harmony to John's lead vocal, and they end up singing the wrong words, and so it kind of gets all jumbled up. And then after that verse, John sings the come on, and that first come on he sings, you can hear him laughing during the come on. And I've always loved that. In fact, that's one of the very first kind of like Beatles secrets, I call the Beatles secret, that my dad ever told me when I was really young. I remember we were listening to a cassette of, I'm assuming it was Please Please Me, but it could have just been a compilation. But the stereo version of Please Please Me came on, and my dad said, okay, listen for this part, because you can hear John laughing, and you can hear them messing up the words. And we listened to it like over and over and over again, like 6 or 7 times, because I was so obsessed with it, and I thought it was so funny and just so cool that they left that in there. And that's only, by the way, available on the stereo mix of Please Please Me. So if you hear the mono version is a completely different recording than the stereo version. So there's no mess up there. Okay, number 9, and this kind of goes with 2 of the previous facts, but John, at the end of Twist and Shout, you can hear John cough. And it's a cough that everyone who's ever had a cold, which everyone out there, you know this cough. This is like your cough when you've got this cold and it's just, you're exhausted and you're coughing and you don't want to cough, but you have to cough. So at Twist and Shout, at the 2 minutes and 29 mark, you can hear John it's at the very end of the song, by the way. You might have to turn it up too, because it's the very end, it's kind of getting faded out. But you can hear John just let out a cough. So that just proves that he was just so sick during the sessions. And of course, famously, Twist and Shout, that was recorded in one take. That's just one take. Probably one of the most famous one-take songs of all time. John just absolutely is just shredding his voice on the song, and he sounds amazing. And the whole performance by all the Beatles is just phenomenal. Twist and Shout, excellent. And the last fact that I have for the Please 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 Me album is that this is the only Beatles album, official Beatles album, that has the songwriting credits reversed for Lennon-McCartney songs. On Please Please Me, all the songs are listed as McCartney-Lennon. Now, obviously, famously, after this, it was always, any song that John or Paul wrote, either together or alone, was always listed as Lennon-McCartney. That was just how it is. That's become just a trademark of their songwriting partnership, Lennon-McCartney. But on this album and on the early singles, it was listed as McCartney-Lennon. And I'm not sure what the whole back history is as to why they at first said McCartney-Lennon. I don't know if that was because it was just what the publishing people wrote, or that was something that that Paul McCartney or John Lennon said that's what they wanted. But obviously, at some point after this album, there was a discussion, and this has been, Paul's talked about it, and I think John's talked about it. And I think what Paul said was that John said that Lennon-McCartney sounds better, and Brian Epstein apparently agreed with that. And then Paul said, well, I don't know, I think McCartney-Lennon sounds better. And in the end, of course, John ended up winning, if you can call that winning, and famously, all the songs were credited to Lennon-McCartney. And kind of interesting to know that Please Please Me, though, is the only Beatles album that has the credits McCartney-Lennon. So, kind of weird. Anyway, those are 10 facts that you may not have known about the Beatles' wonderful first album, Please Please Me. And I will be making more of these videos for each of the Beatles albums. So coming up next will be With the Beatles. So I don't know when I'll be making that video, probably next week sometime. But of course, I will still be making videos about records that I'll be adding to my website, needlemeetsvinyl.com. And I'll just be making the occasional video where I review either like a Beatle book or a Beatle magazine, or maybe I just make a video where it's not Beatle related, and I just find some new records from my own personal collection. So trying to keep this channel as diverse as possible and not just always throwing things at you about my website or even just always about the Beatles. It's nice to have a little bit of variety. So hope you enjoyed this video. In the comments below, please let me know what you think about these new videos I'm going to be doing, and let me know if there are some more facts from Please Please Me album that maybe you have that you think maybe that a lot of people don't know about, or maybe there's some facts of the 10 facts that I gave you. Maybe you think you question some of those and you wonder, like, well, what are my sources? Where did he get this information? And maybe you think they're wrong. So totally down for having a friendly debate about all of these things we just talked about for Please Please Me in the comments below. And stay tuned for the next video. So bye for now.